Hello and welcome to Heilman and Haver, the Stage and Screen Podcast, episode 22, coming to you virtually from Casa de Quinn and 1111 Studios in beautiful Port Orchard, Washington. I'm Matt Haver.
And I'm Greg Heilman. We're two local actors looking to hone our craft by exploring the best in local theater and on the big screen. Each week we bring you entertainment news and views, celebrate classic Hollywood, enjoy cocktails with a Tinseltown twist, interview talented local actors and directors, and chat with industry experts from LA to the UK.
In a few moments, we'll be joined by film critic Matthew Turner, who will share a special event he's hosting this April celebrating classic pre-code films. And speaking of classics, there's another film hitting a milestone this month, released 30 years ago, Silence of the Lambs, winner of the Big Five Oscar Awards, Best Picture, Best Actor for Anthony Hopkins, Best Actress for Jodie Foster, Best Director for Jonathan Demme, and Best Screenplay for the adaptation of Thomas Harris's novel by Ted Talley. To celebrate, the Historic Roxy Theater in Bremerton is hosting two showings of Silence of the Lambs, both at 9 p.m. on Friday, April 9th and Saturday, April 10th.
So visit farawayentertainment.com to buy tickets and join us on our YouTube channel next week for our next episode of In the Mix, dedicated to this iconic film and its unforgettable characters. We won't be drinking Chianti, but we will mix up a couple cocktails in honor of Dr. Lecter, Agent Starling, and the rest of the ghastly gang. And we hope to see you at the Roxy for the special event. We'll be there Friday, April 9th, so come by, enjoy the movie, and make sure to stop by and wish us a good evening.
If you've been a listener for long, you know that we're big on supporting local theater and entertainers and artists. And coming up on April 20th is the 2021 Kitsap Great Give for all of our local listeners. And those outside of the local area can give too. The Great Give is 24 hours of online giving hosted by the Kitsap Community Foundation in support of the many nonprofits in Kitsap County. Two that are close to our hearts are the Historic Roxy Theater, which we just mentioned in Bremerton, and the Western Washington Center for the Arts in Port Orchard.
Matt and I and many of our local listeners have acted at WWCA and enjoyed wonderful entertainment at the Roxy, and strongly encourage you to support them this year. Your donations on April 20th will be magnified by bonus funds, but you don't have to wait until the 20th to donate. Early giving is open now. Links to the Great Give and the Roxy and WWCA websites are in the show notes, so check them out. Read up on this fantastic work that these two theaters are doing in our community, and please donate. Well, now we're pleased to be joined by a friend of the show, Matthew Turner. Matthew is a lifelong film fanatic who has turned his love of the art into an occupation. Matthew has been a professional film critic for over 20 years, and his reviews have been posted in multiple outlets in print and online. He is currently the co-host of the Fatal Attractions podcast, a favorite of this show's, and is the co-author and compiler of the recently published What to Watch When.
Matthew's hosted multiple online viewing events, most recently Noir-Vember, and has just launched this year's Pre-Code April event. Matthew, welcome back.
Welcome back to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me again. I really enjoyed it last time, so it's a pleasure to be back.
We did too. So as we mentioned in your bio and on your last appearance, actually, you're hosting a Pre-Code April event this month. So first, in case our listeners aren't aware of what Pre-Code refers to, it represents the period of time in film between the advent of talkies and the time that the production code, also called the Hays Code, began being strictly enforced in 1934. Named after Will Hays, a Presbyterian elder, go figure, who was brought in by the studios to resurrect Hollywood's image after some risque films and off-screen scandals caused their image to tarnish. And the result was the creation of the Hays Code, enacted in 1930 and gradually implemented until it was fully enforced beginning in 1934. It was a very specific period of time. So tell us again, Matthew, what drew you to bringing a focus to these pre-code movies and then taking it a step further and hosting this event in April?
I just want to, before we start, I just want to kind of slightly clarify in that I didn't exactly host a Noir-Vember event. I just joined in with Noir-Vember like everybody else. It's just I was particularly vociferous about it and posted non-stop throughout November, 2 years running now, about film noir movies. That was created by somebody else. Like that whole idea. Maria at Old Films Flickr is the sort of originator of that. So inspired by that, I mean, I had such a good time during Noir-Vember for 2 years running that inspired by that is I created or thought of Pre-Code April. I mean, I think people were banging about, people were saying, oh, there's Shocktober, there's Noir-Vember, what else can we do basically? And then that I just thought, yeah, actually, and I chose Pre-Code April because A, it's 6 months away from Noir-Vember, so it's exactly the kind of midpoint away in the film year, as it were, and B, because of the repeated pr sound in pre-code and April, because I love a bit of like really tenuous wordplay.
Alliteration, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not alliteration, is it? If they don't start with the same, it's something else. But there is a
Oh,
word,
maybe.
but I
Yeah.
can't remember what it is. Something dissonant. Something
I'm
anyway.
going to
Whatever
defer
it
to
is.
you. You're the author.
And yeah, I mean, personally, like pre-code movies, I've seen lots and lots of 30s movies, for example. And according to my sort of pre-code, my at this point massive pre-code letterboxed list, I've seen 175 pre-code movies, basically. So 175 movies between 1929 and 1934. But it's still a fairly big. I mean, yeah. To give you some example of the scale, I've been doing this list for a while now, and the list is currently at 815.
Wow.
So yes, I've seen 175 pre-code movies, but there's still over like 600 more to see. Basically, I mean that's enough for like 25 pre-code Aprils. So I could be at this for a while.
Yeah, what are you wasting time with us for?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that because I literally did watch 2 pre-code movies today before speaking to you, just to kind of get some of them out of the way. To concentrate on a sort of more specific 30. I've invited like everybody, hopefully I've cast as wide a net as I could think of, like on Twitter, and I've asked people if they'd be interested, and I've signed people up to a Twitter list of people who have expressed an interest in it. Basically, what I would like is for everybody to watch a pre-code movie. Ideally, everybody watches a pre-code movie a day in April and then tweets about it using the hashtag pre-code April without any like hyphens or anything. But really, there are no hard and fast rules, and people are free to do whatever, like as much or as little as they like within that. Whether it's watching one film in the entire month and just writing about that, or watching 3 movies a day, 5 movies a day for the entire month. Basically whatever people want to do. Whether it's simply post posters, post images, post GIFs, post links to articles, to reviews. Whether it's their own reviews, I really don't mind as long as people just add the hashtag pre-code April to everything. We'll see what it is. Basically, it's the first one. I'm hoping it's enough of a success that people have fun doing it and want to do it again next year.
If the current traffic is any indication, if you go out and look at the hashtag pre-code April now, it is kind of a crowdsourced thing. So you've initiated, or you've kind of piqued everyone's interest or whichever, but then people are sharing their lists and sharing, hey, here's where I go to see them, and things like that. So it's already been, even though we're not in April yet, or when we're recording this, we're a day away from April, but there's been a lot of traffic. And I think if that's in any indication, it's going to be a success.
Surely most of that traffic is me, isn't it? At this point.
This guy's so humble.
No, but I mean, I'm aware of the fact that I've done an awful lot of kind of inviting people. I've basically, I follow a lot of people on Twitter anyway, and I particularly follow a lot of like old movie fans and things like that. So if anybody has kind of mentioned a pre-code movie or said they're watching one, or has just posted an image of somebody in a pre-code movie, I've kind of asked them, hey, can I possibly rope you in for pre-code April? What have you? I think I started doing that back in maybe November. So I've had a good kind of 4 or 5 months of kind of trying to round people up for this. I think there are about 200 people on the list that said they were interested and said they were keen to get involved. And I mean, honestly, if even a quarter of those people do it and really go for it, then that'd be brilliant. I'd be overjoyed. Yeah, actually, having said that though, like what you just said about like people getting involved in the sort of traffic and stuff like that, I have, although a couple of people have sent me their pre-code April lists from Letterboxd, I've also seen people's lists pop up who haven't sent me their lists, who are doing it basically, without feeling the need to kind of tell me about it, basically, which is really nice. And I hope like, next time I go to Letterboxd, in a week's time or so, there'll be like loads of them, and lots of people will be doing it. That would be brilliant. I mean, you can't even really call it a genre because it covers so many actual genres. I mean, it's not really a genre in the sense that film noir is a genre, but it covers everything, like gangster movies, horror movies, sex comedies, social issue dramas, all sorts of stuff like that, basically. And so there's plenty of variety within that genre. Within the pre-code kind of umbrella, if you like.
Is it an era then? Period?
I guess it's a era, period. Yeah. I mean, I think people think of it as a genre at this point because there are enough kind of common elements in pre-code movies that make them interesting as pre-code movies. So, for example, sex, drugs, violence, language, what have you, hard-hitting social stuff. I think there are enough like common elements, as we just said, like to call it a genre. I wouldn't if somebody online goes, calls it a genre, I'm not going to correct them, if you see what I mean. But you know what I mean? It's not like it's not a genre in the way we typically think of the word.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I've seen enough people refer to it as a time period that I think that's what I would consider it to be. It's that time between, when talkies first started and then when the code gets introduced and then enforced. But yeah, for our listeners, so we've been bandying about the pre-code and talking about the code and things like that, and you hinted a little bit about some of the things that you see in pre-code movies. What elements of, I guess, the code, or what elements will you see in pre-code movies that you won't see in movies that are been released under the Hays Code?
I really wish I'd brought up that. There's an image online of, in fact, I've got a picture of it. I'll it's a really good kind of photograph that does exactly that. It was kind of created around the time to illustrate exactly that. And the photo shows, I'm just going to find it.
And Matthew, while you're looking that up, I just wanted to clarify, as far as the hashtag Precode April, this is taking place on Twitter, correct? Are there any other social platforms you're working on, or just mostly Twitter?
It's just Twitter. In terms of the stuff I'll be retweeting and kind of looking at and what have you, and sharing and what have you, it's just Twitter. I know I've got at least one American friend who is doing it on Facebook, or who has started posting it on Facebook, and I hadn't quite realised that hashtags work as well as they do on Facebook. So maybe next year, if this really takes off, then maybe I'll do it Facebook next year as well, and perhaps Instagram as well. But for the moment, it is just Twitter. It's really annoying me that I can't find that photo. Oh, I know it's here somewhere. Give me a second. Yeah, I've got it. It's really good. It shows basically it's a poster image. It's quite well known because I think it was created around the time as it's basically a list of no-nos. So it says, "Thou shalt not." 1, law defeated. 2, inside of thigh. 3, lace lingerie. 4, dead man. 5, narcotics. 6, drinking. 7, exposed bosom. 8, gambling. 9, pointing gun. 10, Tommy gun. So I mean, those are the sorts of things that we're getting. It's a poster that shows literally all of those things in one poster, and it's like a list of don'ts, a list of things that the Hays Code would come down hard on.
You mentioned the law will not be defeated. That's one of the things that surprised me. I mean, I think when you're talking about censorship code, sex and gambling and things like that, there's certain things that make sense, but there was the rule that the bad guy always has to come to terms with what he's done. Nothing good can ever happen to the bad guy at the end of the movie.
Evil mustn't go unpunished, basically.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. Crime must not pay. Yeah. Or actually, no, to be fair, in the gangster movies, yes, the gangsters are glamorized and what have you, but they do pretty much come to sticky ends, I think, even in the pre-code era. Well, I did an interview recently talking about kind of what sort of my first introduction to it, and I'm pretty sure my first introduction to it was the James Cagney film Public Enemy, which I saw when I was a teenager, and I remember being really shocked by that ending. Do you happen to know the ending of Public Enemy? I don't really want to spoil it in case anybody watches it because of this podcast, but it's a gangster movie. James Cagney is just absolutely amazing in it. It's kind of quite violent. It's an extremely violent film, actually. He's a pretty nasty piece of work generally. And we were talking about criminals getting their comeuppance. He gets his comeuppance in an extremely way. It's basically the final shot of the movie, and it's really memorable because it is just so bloody hell, can't believe they did that. So that made quite an impression. I mean, Public Enemy is famous for Cagney pushing a grapefruit in May Clark's face. That's the main thing everybody remembers from that movie. But for me, the ending of that movie is just as memorable. I mean, I literally, it's been 30 years probably since I saw that, and those two scenes are, burned into my brain. Whereas I can't really remember anything else about the rest of the film.
Yeah, we recently interviewed Jeremy Arnold from TCM, and he gave us a top 10 list of his Oscar picks, classic Oscar picks, and talked about a few films, things like Silence of the Lambs, where there are those scenes or those characters that, even if you haven't seen it in decades, are still so vivid. They just stick in your mind for years and years, and as if you saw them yesterday.
For Silence of the Lambs, I saw that. I was working in the cinema when that came out, and I was an usher, and in those days you could sit in on the entire film. If you were an usher, so I saw Silence of the Lambs 50 times, I think. I saw it so many times.
That'd leave a mark.
That I knew. I just knew it sort of back to front. Saying there were a handful of 1991 movies that's true for. The Rocketeer, Dances with Wolves, I saw a load of times. The Commitments I must have seen over 60 times. yeah, loads of things like that. Basically, it was great.
Well, here's a question for you. You think about something like Silence of the Lambs and the violence and the insinuated violence and the psychopathic behavior, an R rating, obviously. When we talk about some of the components of the pre-code films, some of the things on that list would seem to qualify a modern film for an R rating as well. But how do you think a majority of those films from that era would measure up on a current scale of film rating, G, PG, R, etc.?
That's a good question. And to be honest, I think probably they would get quite high ratings. Like they maybe, I mean, here in the UK, we have 15s, 18s, 12As, PGs, and Us. So it's not quite the same as an R rating and a PG-13 or whatever it is. And one of the things that's actually quite common in pre-code movies is depictions of suicide and stuff like that. I mean, more often than not, it's typical, like the door close, the guns in the desk, and then the door closes, and you hear the shot from the other side of the room, from outside the room. But like very often, it's quite full on, the depictions and the sort of the way those scenes kind of play out and what have you. And I know that's quite, certainly over here, that's quite a big thing. Suicide, that tends to put a rating, to get a quite high rating. So on that alone, a lot of them would get 15s at minimum here. Language, you don't get much real swearing in the 30s movies. So it does kind of stick out when the odd word slips in. Mostly they all do that thing where they say son of a, and then like there's a cut or there's a sound that obscures the word, or things like that. You very rarely. I did watch a film the other night where somebody said bollocks, but that's more of a British thing than it is an American thing. Bollocks, I mean, I don't know how many of your listeners would know. Bollocks over here is sort of British slang for testicles.
Right.
The Americans tend to use it as, and we use it to mean like something's messed up. If something gets bollocksed up, then it gets messed up, it gets screwed up or whatever. And that was the context that they used it in. I watched Frank Capra's Lady for a Day the other night, and the lead character said, "We don't want to bollocks this up." So I think it's slightly different. It's like I said, slightly stronger here than it is there. Violence. There's a surprising amount of blood in pre-code movies. On-screen depictions of blood. Again, blood is not. It's actually not mentioned in that thing I read out earlier, but that was definitely something that got cleaned up by the Hays Code. Like if you think of one shot and somebody dies in 40s movies, or like late 30s to 40, after the Hays Code, whereas people are getting shot more times. There's a lot more. There's actual blood, sometimes quite nasty. Horror is surprisingly strong in some pre-code movies. There's one called Murders in the Zoo, which has quite possibly one of the most horrible images I've ever seen in any movie, let alone in modern day movies. And it really sticks out for the 30s. It's a really horrible. I mean, you can Google it very easily. There's a GIF of it. But there's a really horrible image from that movie that's genuinely shocking. I watched that with my wife a couple of years ago, and she was traumatized by it. Basically, she doesn't really want to watch any more pre-code movies because she's worried that she'll see something like that again.
Yikes!
What else? So blood's quite a big thing. Rape is a big thing too. Like there's a lot of quite nasty, not full-on explicit nudity rape, but certainly much stronger than you're used to seeing in again, late 30s, 40s, 50s post-code movies. So when it happens, like it's often very nasty, and in particular, like the aftermath. I mean, actually, it's a lot more honest, really, because the aftermath of those scenes is often really horrible. Like I recently watched a film called Massacre from 1934, which is brilliant, actually, where Richard Barthelmess is playing. I don't know if you pronounce it Barthelmess. I'm pronouncing it Barthelmess. Could be completely different, but it's spelled Barthelmess. So I'm pronouncing it that way. He plays like an Indian who has kind of enjoyed success. He's been able to like leave his reservation and has found success as a kind of like rodeo star, but borderline actor. But anyway, he's kind of moved away from his roots, and he's called back to his reservation because his father is sick. And he comes back and he finds all this kind of really horrible exploitation of Indians, basically, and getting swindled out of their land and out of and his 15-year-old sister gets raped, basically, and so he finds his sister, and you've seen like the guy, you've seen her rapist kind of try to kiss her and sort of grab her, and then it cuts to what's happening in another room, and then like a minute later he finds her outside, and her clothes are really torn, and she's crying, and it's just really, really horrible, and you just don't see that stuff, like I said, in the sort of post-code movies. So social issues and sex obviously are the two other things. So it's not so much sex as in you see people having sex. It's more the suggestion and the very obvious, like there's a lot of affairs, for example, that often go unpunished and are often just kind of accepted and what have you. Whereas in later movies, women are very frequently punished for having affairs or for straying or what have you, men too. There's a lot of kind of suggestion that people have just stayed overnight. There's an awful lot of kind of negligee scenes, I suppose, rather than actual nudity.
More innuendo, would you say? More of that kind of innuendo?
Well, yeah, the negligee stuff is pretty racy. There's a lot of bath scenes, for example. Some famous ones. Claudette Colbert bathing in milk in The Sign of the Cross is one. Joan Blondell that's a very famous bath scene. Jean Harlow, sort of nude shower scenes and stuff like that in Red Dust, stuff like that. Something else. Yeah, it's not so much, like I said, it's not so much the actual activity. It's more like the suggestion and the very definite, like, yes, that person stayed the night. Yes, those characters definitely had sex kind of thing, rather than it all being very sort of chaste and what have you.
What were those scenes again? Hang on, I couldn't write them down quick enough.
We can listen to the recording. It'll all be there. And the social issues too, like in particular, alcoholism, drug use, poverty, gambling, all those things again, like really, and prostitution as well, like all those things very sort of prominent in lots of pre-code movies.
Here's a question. Something that we hear a lot of now is the term gratuitous or the glorification. The argument's made that Hollywood is driving the glorification and of violence and graft and all this immoral behavior. You still hear those arguments. Do you feel like pre-code movies glorify it, or do they just show it more than a post-code film?
I feel they show it. I feel like they were telling it like it is. There's a bit of kind of, I mean, obviously you go to see a gangster movie, you're expecting people to get shot and there to be gunfights and betrayals and things like that. You go to see a sex comedy, you're expecting sex. You go to see a horror movie, you're expecting horror. So is it gratuitous in that context? No, I don't think so. I mean, even something like King Kong is technically a pre-code movie, and King Kong is famous for Fay Wray being kind of, in her negligee, being grabbed out the window and carried up the building, the Empire State Building. Is that gratuitous? Should Fay Wray be wearing more clothes?
We'll leave it up to our listeners to decide.
I'm trying to think of some good examples. Like the gangster movies are probably the best examples. And as I said, most of you sort of expect a gangster to come to a sticky end
right
at the end anyway. And also, like, those actors love playing the death scenes. Like Edward G. Robinson, Mother of Mercy, is this the end of Rico? Like he's still famous for that line. Like, nearly 100 years later, he's still famous for that line from the end of Little Caesar. And again, those. Are they bad in the way we think of bad characters? The really bad characters do get killed off and what have you.
Comeuppance, yeah.
I don't think you're ever rooting for anybody evil.
Well, and if you think about that era, a lot of people did view the gangsters as the heroes. I mean, that in not only in popular culture, but in a lot of communities, they were the Robin Hoods. They were the good guys. I'm just curious how Hollywood portrayed them at the time.
I've just brought up and again, okay, this is based on a novel, but the 1931 version of The Maltese Falcon is a really good example because yes, okay, it's very true to the book in that Sam Spade in Dashiell Hammett book is quite an amoral character. He's sleeping with his partner's wife. He pretty much hits on everybody. The 1930s movie is absolutely amazing. I only watched it relatively recently for the first time, like probably about a couple of months ago for the first time, and it completely blew me away. It's probably my second favorite pre-code movie after Freaks. It's so unbelievably sexy. Like he is literally shagging everybody, and there's about 4 women in the movie, and he's having sex with all 4 of them, and it's just completely immoral, but not even kind of caring there's not a flicker of sort of conscience or anything like that. He's just, enjoying his life, I guess. And the Bridget O'Shaughnessy character is so much more like lascivious in the Maltese Falcon than in the Bogart version. There's just so much more sex in it generally than there is in the Bogart version. It's an extraordinary film. I highly recommend it. It is available to rent on Amazon Prime, on Amazon Instant Video, if anybody wants to see it, and I really recommend it.
That's a good segue into what the next thing I wanted to ask you. And first of all, one thing I found is once you start looking into pre-code and the code and things like that, you even start looking at current movies and thinking whether or not that would be allowed, within the code. And I remember watching I Care a Lot recently and wondering, and as we get towards the end, I'm starting to think, boy, this one maybe fly in the Hays Code, and then I'm not going to give away the ending. But the question I have for you is your favorite. So you mentioned that Maltese Falcon might be your second favorite. I guess it's two questions. What do you think is the best pre-code film? So if there was one kind of must-see, or I can only see one pre-code film, what do you think is the best, and what is your favorite if it's different?
I think the answer to both is probably Freaks, Todd Browning's story about circus freaks. Just because the ending is so shocking, and just the stuff you see in it is unlike anything else you'll see. It's literally just, it was ripped off by, or paid homage to, by American Horror Story. So it's just a story of circus freaks who they exact revenge on somebody basically at the end of the movie, and it's in a sort of very famous way. It's still a very odd movie in many ways. But it's so memorable that I think that's probably the one. Again, I think it's important to remember that it's pre-code, so they weren't making a pre-code movie because they didn't know the code was coming. They were making 30s movies. They were making just what they were making. That's what Hollywood was doing. There's no awareness of how risque everything is in those movies. It's just that's the way the movies are at that point. There is a certain amount of things you can get away with. So probably my third favorite film, and certainly my favorite of the gangster films, is Scarface, the original Scarface, which isn't so much. It's not so much the gangster stuff that's shocking in that movie. It's the incestuous relationship between Paul Mooney and his sister, and Dvorak, and that's just an extraordinary kind of relationship on screen where it's very clear that he has incestuous desire for his sister, and not only that, but she's kind of, don't know if into it is the right word, but she's certainly aware of it and definitely manipulates it. Let's put it that way. And again, it's been years since I've seen it, but I saw the GIF recently, and that was I posted the GIF from it recently, and that was enough to make me want to watch it again. And I think it's often said that maybe all that incestuous stuff went under the radar of people who were. Like I said, the code didn't exist, but there were still studios would still interfere and say, okay, you can't do that or whatever, the way they do anyway. And it's often said that the incestuous stuff went under the radar because of the violence happening out in the rest of the movie, because they were so kind of focused on the guns and the shooting and the killing or whatever, that they missed all the actual racy stuff. I guess the only other main example I haven't mentioned yet is Gold Diggers of 1933, which is the other kind of must-see. If there's a must-see in each kind of genre, I would say it's Freaks for horror, Maltese Falcon for kind of thriller, Scarface for gangster movies, Gold Diggers of 1933 for musicals, probably Three on a Match for sexual drama, I suppose. It Happened One Night. It's probably one of the all-time great romantic comedies. It's not extremely pre-code, but it does have little racy elements to it. But yes, back to Gold Diggers of 1933, and that's Busby Berkeley musical. These famous kind of these huge, lavish choreographed routines, but also for showing an awful lot of kind of flesh, and so the costumes are practically non-existent in a lot of those movies. Surprisingly salacious in terms of the songs and the what the movie's actually about. So yeah, highly recommend that as well.
Well, follow up to that question is, where can our listeners find some of these pre-code films? Are a lot of them available? Like you said, the original Maltese Falcon from 31 is on Amazon Prime. Are there a lot of them on the streaming services? Do you have to hunt them down on eBay, on DVD, or VHS, God forbid?
I just did a list of films that are available on Amazon Prime in the UK, and there's only a very small handful of those. There are quite a few available on. A lot of the big ones are available on Amazon Instant Video, so you can rent them. Let's just say that every single film you can possibly think of is out there somewhere.
That's good news.
But in terms of legal avenues for watching movies, there are plenty of options. Like, there's a lot of these films are in the public domain anyway. So there's a pre-code cinema channel on YouTube that has at least 200 movies on it. The latter, if you look at my pre-code letterbox list on Letterboxd, the latter, like I said, there's currently about 815 movies on it. And everything from about 650 on that list onwards through to 815 is on the Pre-Code Cinema YouTube channel. Similarly, there are films that maybe are not on the Pre-Code Cinema channel that are on YouTube anyway. It's just a question of searching for full movies. There are other streaming sites. If you look around for other streaming sites, like, you will find movies in the public domain plus movies that people have put up anyway. Yeah, like I said, there are a bunch on Amazon Prime. Not that many, probably about only 15 or so on Amazon Prime in the UK anyway. There may be quite a lot more in the US actually. Having said that,
Certainly enough to get someone started. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can rent a load of them on Amazon Instant Video too. Like, there's a lot of the kind of famous titles are available to rent on Amazon Instant Video. And I would also say, like, if anybody is looking for a particular movie that they want to see, especially in Pre-Code April, then DM me on Twitter or just find me on Twitter, because I can help you find it very easily. So I'm at FilmFan1971 on Twitter, and I'm happy to kind of, like I say, point you in the right direction, basically.
All right. Well, thank you, Matthew. So Matthew Turner's our guest, as he said, at FilmFan1971, 1971 on Twitter. You can search the hashtag Pre-Code April, all one word, to find out more information about Pre-Code April. Matthew's going to be sticking around. We have a couple of more questions for him about award season and the UK take on films and things like that. So Matthew will be sticking around. So I hope you do too. Come back on Heilman and Haver. Welcome back to Heilman and Haver. Today is April 2nd, and on this day in 1968, 2001, A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick, premiered at the Uptown Theater in Washington, D.C., and so the world was all introduced to HAL. Voiced by actor Douglas Rain, the HAL 9000 supercomputer guides mankind through time and space with its now famous disembodied voice to find its origins. Director Stanley Kubrick won an Oscar for this film's visual effects, his sole win from 13 nominations.
And according to IMDb, at the premiere screening, 241 people walked out of the theater, including actor Rock Hudson, who said, "Will someone tell me what the hell this is about?" Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote the screenplay, once said, "If you understand 2001 completely, we failed." Clarke later expressed some concern that the film was too hard to follow and explained things more fully in the novelization and subsequent sequels.
And born today in 1914, British actor Sir Alec Guinness, immortalized in the role of Jedi Master and mentor to Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi in George Lucas's original Star Wars trilogy, for which he received the nomination for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Guinness had a love-hate relationship with his most famous role and claimed that Obi-Wan's death was his idea in an effort to limit his involvement in the movie. And let's get one thing straight, he never uttered the line, "May the Force be with you," in any of the Star Wars films. The closest he came was, "The Force will be with you."
What frustrated Guinness most about his involvement in Star Wars were the millions of fans who knew him only as Obi-Wan, to the exclusion of all of his other work. As one of the last surviving members of a great generation of British actors, which included Sir Laurence Olivier, Sir John Gielgud, and Sir Ralph Richardson, who made the transition from Shakespearean theatre in England to Hollywood blockbusters right after the Second World War, Guinness also appeared in classics like Lady Killers in 1955, The Bridge on the River Kwai in 1957, Lawrence of Arabia in 1962, and, my favorite, as blind, scheming butler James Benson Mum in Neil Simon's 1976 murder mystery farce, Murder by Death. And joining us today is a man who probably knows a thing or two about great British actors, our friend, UK film critic Matthew Turner. So, Matthew, in our ongoing coverage of the Academy Awards coming up April 25th, I wanted to get your input. Sacha Baron Cohen, Carey Mulligan, Olivia Colman, Daniel Kaluuya, and Sir Anthony Hopkins are among the British stars nominated for this year's Oscars. Obviously, many British actors and actresses have taken Little Gold Men back across the Atlantic. But what do the Oscars themselves mean to folks in the UK? Does it carry much water in England as far as an awards ceremony, or is most of the focus there on the BAFTA awards?
I'm a bit biased because I'm an Oscars nut, so I'm an extreme Oscars fan. So
Good answer.
and Oscars obsessive even. So and I really have a lot of issues with the BAFTAs. So I don't pay any attention to what wins the BAFTAs, but I pay all the attention to what wins the Oscars. And certainly 30 years ago, before I became a film critic, when I was just seeing lots of movies in cinemas, I think I know for a fact that like when a film wins an Oscar, it has an increased box office. It has, it does better at the box office in the UK as well as in the US. So even audiences that don't necessarily watch the Oscars will still pay attention to what wins the Oscars. Like, so if something wins Best Picture, if somebody wins Best Actor, if somebody wins Best Actress, those movies will be seen more than they would have done if they hadn't won. Whether that same is true for Best Screenplay, for Best Director, for Best Supporting Actor, Supporting Actress even, I'm not sure. But definitely the big ones will have that impact. And it's hard for me to answer that question properly because all of my friends, like a lot of my friends are film critics and a lot of my friends are Oscars nuts. So like I'm in this kind of Oscar obsessed bubble. Plus I vote myself in two different awards bodies. I'm a member of the Online Film Critics Society, and I'm also a member of the London Film Critics Circle. So we have our own awards season as well, and it's always interesting to compare. So generally speaking, yes, people pay attention. The ceremony is broadcast on Sky Cinema over here live. It used to be years and years ago. It used to be on the BBC. There is an interest. It will be on the news. Like the news covers the BBC News covers the nomination, the live nomination announcement. That kind of thing. To be completely honest, like for me, the nominations is the most exciting part of the entire award season. Like once the nominations are over, I kind of lose a little bit of interest after that. What's exciting to me is what gets nominated, what gets snubbed, what are the surprises, what are the shocks, what are the big omissions and things like that. I mean, to be fair, like I think this year is a pretty good year. But in previous years, it can often be quite boring, especially because the Oscars is always the last thing in award season. So by that point, you feel like you've seen how award season is going to play out anyway, and it's either is it going to do this or is it going to do its own thing. But there are very few surprises usually come Oscar night, and that's kind of what you watch it for, is the surprises and the shocks and what have you. I mean, obviously the whole Moonlight and La La Land thing is something else.
the spectacle of it, yeah.
But absolutely.
So you mentioned that you've got your own voting bodies over there, the film critics and things like that. Do they normally align with Oscars, or are they different groups of films?
Normally the same. In a normal non-COVID year, award season is broadly the same for everybody. Yeah, there may be a couple of outliers, but that's very rare. Maybe sometimes a film will get released in the UK that will be nominated for a BAFTA that hasn't yet been released in the US, but that's very, very rarely the case. And vice versa as well. Like maybe something gets released in the US to qualify for award season and then doesn't come out over here in time. But again, usually the distributors will go out of their way to make sure that something gets a qualifying award screening over here the same way it does in the US.
How about winners? I mean, do you guys, how do you do, compared to, winners in your circle versus Oscar winners?
I think in both circles, I mean, I can't speak for everybody in them, but I think there is, let's say in critic circles compared to the BAFTAs, I think there's maybe an attempt at least to try and pick something distinctive that might go unrewarded elsewhere. Certainly when you're voting and nominating, most of my friends in the circle tend to pick things that might not otherwise have a chance or might have been overlooked. Or so that's definitely how I try and see it. So I wouldn't vote for any of the kind of front runners in the nomination round because I figure they're going to get through without my help. So I'll vote for kind of smaller films that I think should get. But I'm inevitably disappointed. Having said that, like I tried really hard this year to kind of stump for a few movies that I really felt as everybody needed to see, and they just got completely ignored. Like I love Truffle Hunters, for example. Have you seen that?
Not, no.
Truffle Hunters is this documentary that, again, I really thought would get a Best Picture nomination in the Oscars, and it didn't even get that. So I'm really quite sad about that. It was definitely in the running because I listened to a few, or at least one of the Film Spotting podcast were talking about like their ballots and things like that for the Chicago Critics Circle, and they were really big on Truffle Hunters. Truffle Hunters did pick up like critics nominations, but sadly they didn't translate to the Best Documentary category this year. So yeah, I mean, having said that, we will also more often than not pick the same winners as everybody else, just because a lot of the voting body. Again, like it depends what people have seen. Like the things people tend to see, the things that have all the buzz. When you've got like a massive pile of award screeners, you're gonna like whether you're an Oscar voter or a BAFTA voter or whatever, you're gonna pick. If you're not watching films all year round, like critics are, you're gonna pick the movies that everybody's talking about. That's often how the ones that maybe that people think, well, that's not a great Best Picture winner, win because everybody's seen them and everybody votes for them because everybody's talking about them. Yeah, so and that's how that stuff happens basically. Pretty much all the sort of really egregious wins that people have, like famous for example for me is Crash, the Paul, it's not Paul Greengrass, is it? Who is it? Paul something. Who's the guy that directed Crash?
Ooh, I've got to IMDb that one.
Not David Cronenberg's Crash, the other one.
Oh, Paul Haggis.
Yeah. The fact that we can't remember, that the three of us can't remember Paul Haggis. Yeah, right. The fact that we couldn't remember Paul Haggis, like it says everything about like about that. So yeah, so so that one Best Picture beating Brokeback Mountain, which is clearly the best picture of that year, and it was beaten at the post by Crash, which is a terrible movie. But the reason that happened is because everybody saw it and everybody was talking about it, and it was all, it's very worthy, it's very like anti-racism. So yeah, so all the kind of like Oscar crimes are largely because those movies are the ones that get talked about and take on a life of their own, basically.
Well, we can't let you go without hearing about your favorites, not only from among the British actors and actresses that are nominated for the Oscars this year, but how about Best Picture? Who do you like this season?
I think it's a good lineup this season, to be honest. I would say my three favourites from the Best Picture lineup are The Father, Sound of Metal, and I'll be honest, I really like The Trial of Chicago 7. I know like it's had its kind of knockers and what have you for whatever reason, but I really enjoyed it for what it was. I do like I like them all, to be honest. I really like Promising Young Woman. I really like Minari, and Nomadland is also excellent. The London Film Critics gave it to Nomadland, I think. I would probably pick The Father from that list just because it really. My mum's got dementia for one thing, so I'm always gonna respond emotionally to a dementia movie, and that movie captures dementia like nothing else I've seen. I've seen a lot of dementia movies over the years as a critic, and that one absolutely captures the terror and horror of what it's like to actually have dementia as opposed to experiencing it. All the other movies are always experiencing it from the relative's point of view, from the son or daughter, as part of the wife's or husband's point of view, as their spouse or parent succumbs to it. But this really captures the kind of confusion and terror and what it must be like.
Yeah, my grandmother suffered from dementia, and I felt exactly the same way. Sir Anthony is definitely my pick for Best Actor this year.
Yeah, mine too. I mean, I love Riz Ahmed, and I'm delighted that Riz Ahmed has been nominated. I love Steve Yuen. It's really great to see him being nominated as well. But I don't think and Chadwick Boseman, obviously, rest in peace, etc. Of the Best Actor nominees, I don't think Gary Oldman really deserves it this year, and I actually didn't think he deserved to win for Churchill either. That's another example of like a thing that wins because everybody's talking about it without it actually being maybe as good as people say it is. Like I didn't think it was. He wasn't even the best. If I remember, he wasn't even the best Churchill that year. Like I think Brian Cox did a better Churchill in a different movie that same year, and nobody was talking about that. 100% Anthony Hopkins for me for that category this year.
Speaking of Mank, from a outside of the U.S. perspective, you often see these films that the ones that get the most nominations generally take home the Best Picture award. Is that something that you see as being a legitimate way to judge a film?
Because it has the most nominations.
Yeah, the most nominations across the most categories. Should that automatically qualify a film as the Best Picture?
I think if a film is going to pick up multiple nominations across multiple categories, then it deserves to be in the Best Picture lineup. I guess that's how I look at it. Whether it deserves to win Best Picture, not necessarily. But I'm sure that if we went through a list of films that have had the most nominations and that also won Best Picture, we'd probably think most of them deserve them. But again, like in this particular case, Mank's quite interesting because a lot of the awards bodies didn't give it either didn't nominate it for Best Picture or certainly didn't give it the Best Picture award. And obviously Hollywood loves movies about Hollywood.
Right.
So Mank was always going to do better in the Oscars than it has done elsewhere. That also explains Oldman's nomination too, I think. But I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I really wanted to love it. But it should have been right up my street. I love the way it looked. I love the performances. I thought Amanda Seyfried was great, and for my money, Amanda Seyfried would win. For my money, she deserves to win Best Supporting Actress. I think she is the Best Supporting Actress in that category. But yeah, I didn't love it, and I haven't given it a second chance yet. I haven't watched it. I haven't rewatched it. But yeah, for me, it's probably the least in that category. If I was going to rank them, I think it would probably be like at the bottom or close to the bottom. Yeah, I was a bit surprised. I mean, even within what we just said about Hollywood loving movies about Hollywood, I was still surprised that it picked up quite as many nominations as it did. And I did. Oh, I was just about to say I did laugh out loud because David Fincher wasn't nominated for Best Director, but he was nominated for Best Director. So yeah, I forget I said that.
I guess the question is, will we get to watch him take a shot every time he doesn't win, like we did during the Golden Globes?
That's right.
Oh, I missed the Golden Globes this year. I didn't bother watching.
So Fincher, every time Mank was nominated for something and they didn't win, he took a shot. So
fair play to him. That's the way to do it, I guess. Some of the other categories are really interesting, though. I think the Best Director round is really excellent. The Best Director nominations are really excellent this year. Like, absolutely thrilled with that. And I think that's a direct result of COVID-19, of this particular award season year, is that we've got that lineup. I would think that in a normal year, something like, for example, News of the World would have been in the Oscar lineup. I love that movie, and it is absolutely the sort of thing you can see getting nominations for Best Picture, nomination for Best Director, for Best Actor, for Best Supporting Actress. And the fact that it was actually in the end shut out completely is a real shame, I think.
Well, we're going to keep an eye on things, and we sure appreciate your expertise. We'll have to touch base with you again and get your take on the ever surprising, ever scintillating results of the of the Oscars. So, Matthew, thanks so much for your time today. Obviously, talking about stuff from 100 years ago and current stuff, and we appreciate your input as always.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Follow Matthew and get involved in the Pre-Code April festivities on Twitter on his page at @FilmFan1971. And if you're a fan of the erotic thriller genre, check out his podcast, Fatal Attractions, on iTunes, and the show's Twitter page at @FatalAttractPod. Both linked in the show notes.
And solve that eternal debate, what should we watch tonight? With Matthew's book, What to Watch When, 1,000 TV shows for every mood and moment. And make sure to check out Matthew's reviews on the Film Discussion social media page Letterboxd. Just search FilmFan1971, all one word, FILMFAN1971, and check out his Hidden Gems column on Vodzilla.co for more viewing ideas.
Join us next Friday, April 9th, when we'll be joined by another friend of the show, TCM author, film historian, and commentator Jeremy Arnold, who'll share his top 10 classic Oscar winners with us and a few more must-see films from his latest book, The Essentials Volume 2, 52 More Must-See Movies and Why They Matter, recently published by Running Press and Turner Classic Movies.
And remember, Heilman and Haver can now be heard every week. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Audible, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And if you enjoy the show, make sure to follow us and share the podcast with a friend. We'd love to hear from you, so please join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter and email us with thoughts and comments at heilmanandhaver@gmail.com. And until we're treading the boards together again, thanks for supporting local theater and for joining us on Heilman and Haber.